All right, good morning. Welcome everybody. Here we are, different environment. We got our little Wednesday chat. We thought we'd do something a little different. We are in Rotary Park, essentially downtown Calgary. And instead of a little chat inside, we thought we'd come outside, have our chat, and then just walk around the park and just show you what is available, what is accessible in an urban environment. Urban downtown park, just a little bit of a plant walk. I hope you enjoy this. I know you will. And we're going to meet a lot of plants, and then Blaine is going to share his insights and wisdom about the plants and this place.
There's just so many things people walk by here every day, every morning. There's a stream of traffic here. People buy houses in this neighborhood for far more money than they would get at the edge of town. Out in the suburbs, you'd get a bigger house for the same amount of money, but then you have to pay for parking and all of that and waste 40 minutes every day commuting to work. But it's amazing how many people just walk by all of the abundance of nature that's in parks like this.
Yeah.
And for the most part, even if you've got a park that's been sprayed for dandelions, they haven't been spraying trees, I don't think, ever in any city park. So when you find berries that are in bushes and things like that, yes, you might be robbing some songbirds, I suppose, but there's lots of stuff they're not going to have access to. So I don't have any guilt picking berries in a city park.
And there's lots that you won't be able to access. I mean, if we take, here's a pear tree over here, there's only so much we can reach of those, right?
Yeah.
90% of it is out of our reach, which leaves it for other animals.
I see neighbors coming in with rakes.
Oh.
Sometimes to get the higher fruit.
Yeah.
I actually brought a 9-foot stepladder over the year I was making chutney to get the highest. And little boys climb the trees sometimes to get the fruit and break a branch.
Yeah.
That's a bigger insult than taking a few fruit, I think.
Right.
But so it goes.
And, the other thing about this is, because there's this argument, well, if we all started doing that, there wouldn't be anything left. It's like, you know what? If we all started doing that, we would value these spaces more. We would value these plants more. We would have them in our front yards, our backyards, our alleyways, the boulevards. We'd fill the parks with these types of plants even more than we already are doing now.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't, like everybody getting into this, I feel would cause us to, value them more, grow them more.
Thank you.
And it would just be more abundant.
Yeah, very good point, Malcolm. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Other point I'd like to make, I mean, I'm born and raised in the city. I have lived out in the country. I love the country. I love being in nature. It's really where my soul, feels at home. And I also love the city. And I was chatting with this woman, Rosita Arvigo, quite a famous herbalist. She started rainforest medicinals. She's written books about rainforest medicine. She was kind of born and raised in the States, met one of the last of a lineage of kind of a Mayan elder. He was 90 when they met, and she worked with him after quite a while of kind of courting him to be his apprentice, to pass on this knowledge. Between 90 and 103, so 13 years, they work together, learning all that wisdom and that knowledge. And she spends half her time between Belize and half her time in Chicago. And we had a nice little connection when she came by the shop yesterday. And she was telling me how much she loves Chicago and that it's one of the most diverse places for plants. And I had this revelation when I was in Los Angeles a couple of years ago as well, where you think pick two big giant cities like Chicago, LA, right? The first thing you don't think of biodiversity, you don't think of plant life. But those cities, from her testament and my experiences and observations in LA, is wow, what a mecca for plant life. For her, she's saying, here's a place that's got more than 100 feet of incredible topsoil that the city was built on top of. Los Angeles has got the climate, but people plant stuff, right? And they like nice things in different varieties. And within Los Angeles area, easily, I don't know what the multiple times it would be, there is far more biodiversity in the city of Los Angeles than, the kind of native wild areas around there. And I think both are beautiful. both are examples of, okay, let's have some wild spaces that's indigenous native plants, and within our own little kind of bubbles and ecosystems that we create, whether they be your yard or whether they be cities that we inhabit, there is that opportunity to plant a variety of species that are beautiful, that are useful, and in a city we can have an incredible amount of biodiversity. And I think what we're going to do today, just kind of wandering around, we're not even going to talk about a fraction of what's growing here. We're going to talk about the things that you have a connection to, having lived just down the road, coming here every day, walking your dogs with your community, bringing students here. What are the plants that are in our backyard? What are the wild ones? What are the introduced species? That's kind of our point today, isn't it?
Yeah. While you were talking about the American cities, I just had a flash of, I was doing some talks at a conference in San Francisco years back, and went out for an early morning walk. And I managed to, just within a couple blocks of the big hotel, right in Fisherman's Wharf, I found several things growing that probably shouldn't have been there, but they blew in from somebody's garden or whatever.
Right.
That I was able to pick and take for samples to pass around the crowd. But the part that really amazed me was right around two sides of the park was a hedge that they were trimming with those big electric hedge trimmers.
Yeah.
That was completely rosemary, like this high and this thick and this wide. Like, one little handful of that at the supermarket here is $3,
Right.
kind of thing. And they were taking it away and putting it in a shredder.
Oh man.
And I was just, oh my gosh.
Let's take it away, throw it into a still, right? Let's get some rosemary oil, some
It
hydrosol
just
from that.
absolutely astounded me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's one thing you can definitely grow rosemary here in the summer. You can have it as an indoor plant. I'd love to.
Yeah, I grow rosemary always. Well, I did until I'm in the home now, but
Yeah.
it's especially, rosemary is one that really stimulates the liver to produce more bile. So using rosemary as part of a recipe is really great with things like seafood or cheesy things, anything that's really rich.
Right.
Fatty dishes.
Yeah.
So I would always use rosemary with things like lobster,
Oh yeah.
shellfish and things like that, with lots of garlic butter,
Right.
or even just with garlic butter on popcorn,
Right.
stuff like that, and get some rosemary in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's neat because like the flavor really lends itself, like it's like rosemary and lamb, like it kind of has a flavor that cuts through and really works with
Yep.
rich fatty dishes.
Yep.
And has that chemistry to help your body to digest it. There's got to be something with cardamom too, cinnamon, right? Like always kind of being paired with sweet. And as I know, cinnamon helps with blood sugar regulation. I don't know
Yes.
too much about cardamom, but I know one time we created a mead that just like it was basically done, but it was still so sweet, like sickly sweet. And one of the things that actually made it palatable was adding a whole bunch of cardamom to it.
And we're using whole pods or just some dried herb?
Yeah, just dried herb. Yeah, just kind of put it in and infuse right in beautifully.
It's nice that we have enough culture in Calgary that a lot of those herbs and spices can be bought whole in
Right.
stores. Like I love tamarinds, for example, and you can buy
Yeah.
tamarind sauces, but they're in season most of the year, even in stores like Safeway
Right.
at times.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, no, I know you're a big kind of aficionado of the Oriental markets and stores, and being where we are, there's Chinatown just down the hill there. Yeah, the access is incredible. I remind myself and others of that so much that in this day and age we've got access to literally not only huge diversity of the greatest
And all of the other things
spices,
that happen when you
foods.
walk in the door. There's temple bells and incense burning and bells in the background, and
Right.
some of the Italian stores I used to visit, there'd be the older women were out in the back alley with two barbecues making the smoked peppers.
Right.
There's that culture
Yeah.
that you just don't get when you walk into a supermarket.
Yeah.
Not to ditch supermarkets, they serve as well, but
Mm-hmm.
there's so many little culture stores in this town, this city, that just help. Especially if you become a regular there, they'll say, "Oh, morning, Malcolm." Mr. Malcolm here, honey, come say hi, Mr. Malcolm. And for me, I would say, "Oh, I always feel so wise when I come into your store, And you know how Asians can't say L's very well?
Right.
And they say, "Oh, Mr. Brain is here! Mr. Brain is here!" So I say, you make me feel so smart, you know?
The brain, Mr. Brain.
Mr. Brain, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, we should get rolling.
Yeah. How are they?
Oh, yeah.
They're getting there, hey? They're ripening up.
Yeah, the dark ones, there's over there.
Oh, nice.
And it's so nice for the throat.
All right, Blaine, what are we standing in front of? What are we enjoying?
Where am I going to stand this way?
Here in Rotary Park. Yeah, we're rolling.
Oh, we're rolling already. Oh, silly me. Well, we're standing in front of one of the tallest ribes that I've ever seen. Ribes is the genus where we have gooseberries and red and black currants, all of which are astringent, but have their different values. And the black currant in particular, one of my favorites, my mother used to make a jelly from it. And my first experience with this was having a really, ironically, I was doing a wild plants course for the weekend, just a short walk through the woods from their home near a lake in north central Saskatchewan. And I was really worried about talking all weekend when I had such a dry, scratchy throat. And she said, "Oh, I'll fix you up." And she just gave me some of her black currant jelly, put a big heaping tablespoonful into a cup, added boiling water, made a little tea out of it. Amazing. And I was amazed, just in the time it took me to walk to my class, my throat was perfect.
Wow.
So, you know, that prompted me later in life here doing classes. This is one of the places I would bring my students because I used to live just up the street. And we would pick a lot of the black currants here and cook them up. And while doing that, we would take, at some point we'll see plantain, which is a very, very, very common plant. And the seeds, which are abundant, have a bit of a coating on them that's demulcent. And if we didn't have any plantain, we would throw in some flaxseed, for example, not for what we usually get out of flax, which is the oils, but just for that coating, to let them, as the currants were simmering, we'd get that coating would come off the seeds.
Right.
And then maybe add a little bit of something well known as a demulcent, something like slippery elm.
Right.
Or marshmallow or whatever, a bit of that once we strained it all.
Yeah.
And make this used usually with a dropper like a tincture.
Yeah.
Or you could have a little sip out of the bottle. But absolutely outstanding for a really dry, sore throat. A cough as well, but just sore throat in particular. It's one of my, I would put it at the top of the list.
Awesome.
So all members of this genus, I'm just looking, and this one ironically isn't. Typically, gooseberries and currants are a little bit protected in some way. In fact, all over the world, if something's protected, like cactus, for example, it's usually because they're good to eat, and they're defending themselves, right? So I'm going to kind of jump around here a little bit. Red currants, crushed up and rubbed onto the skin, would be the closest thing you'll get to aloe vera gel for a burn.
Right.
It's very astringent and a cooling effect. And black currants, like I said, specialists for the throat, but they're all useful, and all of them can be made into jellies. Gooseberries are probably about the most, I don't want to say bitter because it's the wrong word, but tart.
Right.
You know, they have a tartness to them.
Yeah.
But they all work in that way. Gooseberries in particular used to be used for menstrual problems, especially with young ladies just coming into puberty.
Yeah.
And their first periods, cramping and such, made as a tea.
So could you use the gooseberry in a similar way topically for burns, or is that more specific to red currant?
Well, they'd all probably work because they're astringent.
Yeah.
You know, and the idea with the burn is we don't want it to blister too bad.
Yeah.
So,
because I found some really nice ones in the alley the other day. They were quite large, but they just had that kind of, you know, as you're describing, like aloe, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. Yeah. So I could see that being applied topically and working.
A little bit slimy.
Yeah. So red currants, they grow wild near my house in the forest. Here we have black currant. Almost certainly this was planted, cultivated.
Yep.
But that's one of the benefits of being in the city is you can plant these things, right? Who needs or wants a lawn? Most of us have more lawn than we want or could
lawn
use.
was where lawn started was
Actually, we should show examples of that, because this is a great neighborhood, at least for some of the older homes that had that kind of display.
Lon started with royalty saying to everybody else, look how rich I am, I can waste this land.
Right.
Common people had to use every square foot they had to grow their food. Okay, but the rich, who were taxing the poor as well, could say, look, I can waste this land, so I'm just going to have a lawn. And now everybody's got a lawn, and we go buy our groceries in a store. And thanks to people like you, we're learning more about reclaiming things. So many people are getting into permaculturing and turning. I had with my yard near here, at first the neighbors wondered what was happening because I was getting rid of my lawn, and for 2 years I kept an 8-inch pot, like a plant pot, 8-inch pot of my lawn, and a little pair of child's plastic scissors on my front porch. And if somebody would say, hey Blaine, you've got rid of your whole lawn, I said, no, I've got some here. So instead of having a flower pot, I had a lawn pot.
Right.
And I step by step took over the whole.
And then you had a flower lawn.
Yeah. They knew I was serious one Sunday morning when they took a sledgehammer to my sidewalk and replaced it all with river rock. That's where they knew I was serious.
Yeah, amazing.
And once the whole yard was taken, I took the city boulevard. I checked first, and it's legal to do that. And as long as you take care of it, and you got to respect that there's weeds that they don't want growing, most of which are useful.
Right. Yeah.
But there's a bad weeds list that you've got to take care of, and you can't let your thing go to seed, and they don't want to see a whole bunch of dandelions and things like that, right?
Yeah.
But the one thing I forgot was that back to prickles.
Right.
Most
gooseberries typically have the thorns, don't they?
Yeah, most currants and gooseberries have either thorns on the branches, or little they wouldn't stab you so much, they're just annoying, but prickles right on the berries, right on the fruit. And something that an old Cree fella taught me just before breakfast one morning, he saw that I had a bunch of currants, red currants I think they were, and he said, you know what to do with those prickly things, eh? And I said, no, what are you talking about? And he just showed me right there. I had my wok right there.
Yeah.
And he just took a bunch of the currants, threw them in there, and took a bunch of coals from the fire, threw them in, and he looked like he was panning for gold.
Oh.
And rolling the coals around with the berries singes all the little prickly hairs off.
Oh, amazing.
And then you can just go rinse them.
Yeah.
And they taste, well, they don't taste better, but you don't have the annoyance when you have it with your granola.
Right.
So there you go, an old Cree trick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of preparing these currants, be that red, black, or gooseberry, as I mentioned, I grow black currants, red currants. I do have gooseberry as well in the yard. Last year, my black currant bush did the best. Had a nice, good crop for especially the size of plant it was. And, I think traditional methods are to kind of like simmer it, boil it, add your sugar, strain it if you want to do a syrup, or thicken it if you want to do a jam. I did a little bit differently. I did 2 experiments. As you tasted last weekend when we went out with the group, these fruit honeys, these herbal honeys. Oh my gosh, like so amazing. So we had a wild cranberry honey, which literally you just take the fruits and you put them in honey. We also had a Haskap honey. So I did the same with the black currants. And the honey basically, preserves it. So it's not going to spoil, it's not going to go off. But as it extracts all the goodness. So it turns the honey, the deep, nice, like kind of black, red color. Brings out all the flavor. And then the other experiment I did was I basically just put them into sugar. And then the sugar draws out the moisture, breaks the cell walls, draws it out, and it kind of creates its own syrup, mixing the cane sugar, and you could use any type of sugar, but the cane was nice, and draws out the moisture. And so what I did was basically poured off the liquid, and then that was my blackcurrant syrup. Right. And then
you probably do that warm.
No, this was just at room temperature. Yeah.
Okay. I would think, why not warm?
One could give it a little simmer.
Because you want to get all the seeds out.
Well, so I did strain it out for the liquid, and that was my syrup. And then everything that was left over, all the kind of the fiber and the pectin and the seeds, was essentially like my jam.
I see.
Way. Yeah.
Okay, you get my point though with.
Oh yeah, totally.
Just because it's runnier.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of different ways to prepare this, and absolutely delicious. That syrup you can, do as Blaine suggested. Take it by the dropper, more medicinally, but it can be a beautiful syrup mixed with water, sparkling water, for
waffles.
Waffles, yeah, absolutely.
You can make gluten-free waffles, I think. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Cool. All right.
Moving on.
Ribes.
So, what a lovely background of lilies. These have been planted. But all domestic and wild lilies, you can get them in about 35 colors in the garden centers. And we have many wild varieties. As coming from Saskatchewan, our provincial flower is Lilium montanum, which is the wood lily. People call them tiger lilies, but tiger lilies are really like a shrub that grows in BC, and they got spots all over them. Anyway, common confusion. Anyway, all lilies, no matter what size they are or what color or whatever, are completely edible. The leaves, the bulb. Now, if we take the bulb, obviously we killed the whole plant because we took the bulb. That's its root, so we ate the whole thing. So you want to be conscious of that. But picking the flowers doesn't really do the plant any harm. And if anybody wants to argue that, I have staked wild lilies out in the foothills and put flagging tape on them and come back. In fact, I found one. They're always just one flowered. And I found one day, not far from my truck, that had 2 flowers on the head. I'd never seen that before, so I staked it, put flagging tape on it, ate the 2 flowers, and came back the following year. And not only was it still in flower, but it had 2 flowers again. So go figure. So when people say, oh, you can't eat the lilies because they'll die, I say, have you ever checked? I'm kind of big on checking things. For now, I'm just going to check this. The only danger of this flower is getting pollen on your nose or all over a white cotton shirt, because it's really hard to get the pollen out, when you're going to stain your shirt. Anyway, if you start from the back end, you keep the pollen off your nose. Hands down, from any country, my favorite vegetable, lily flowers. And they're so beautiful to do things like decorate a wedding cake with, or leave them on top. You're going to break them up eventually, but to come to a summer party, backyard party, somebody's birthday party, and just use a bunch of the lilies on top as a top dressing, and then you're going to break them apart and throw your dressing on and toss the salad. But they're so beautiful, and you bring so much of that beauty to your heart when you eat them. They're just so happy and beautiful, and yeah. Anyway, we have one genus in the lily family called Zygadinus, and the common name is death camas, which should give you a clue. And as little as 1 ounce of the bulbs. Now remember, if you're digging a plant up and taking the bulbs, you've harvested the whole plant. So if you're eating lily bulbs, which are tasty and crunchy and sweet, you have killed the plant. You took the whole thing. So you have to take responsibility for that. So only do that if there's a lot of them around. We often use a little rule called the 1 in 20 rule. If there isn't 20 plants there, don't pick any. But if there's 20, you might have 1. And if there's 1,000, you might make a salad. If a whole hillside is covered, I'm going to go in face first and feel no guilt whatsoever, right? So kind of take that maybe as a starter, as the 1 in 20 rule. Anyway, so all lilies are edible. What's in a name? The Latin name for that bad one is Zygadinus gramineus. So if you knocked on a door and somebody came in some simple clothes and said, "Hello, I'm Zygadinus gramineus. Would you like to come in for some tea, you little darlings?" I think I'd keep walking, right? There's other places to stop for tea. So anyway, Latin names can be, like I think the Latin name for grizzly bear is something or other horribilis. Like you get a clue there too, right? Anyway, I don't have any medicinal uses particularly, but they're just such yummy things, the wild lilies, and when I find them in abundance out in the foothills or in my native northern Saskatchewan, I'm apt to get on my knees and eat a few, and there's actually a $500 fine for picking them. So I had it cleared one day by some Supreme Court judges that if you go down on your knees, put your hands up in the air, and just eat them. One judge looked to another and said, It's getting close to lunch, Harry, and I don't think there's anything in the legislation about grazing. So I had all these lawyers and judges on their feet or on their knees with their hands up in the air, starting a new dance, eating wood lilies in a park in Saskatchewan, which should be a $500 minimum fine, even $5,000 fine because we were eating them in a park. But there was a whole hillside covered with them, and I think we were okay that day. And the only reason they're rare in southern Saskatchewan is something called farming. They used to be all over the place, and they all got plowed under so we could grow things like wheat. So if a farmer wants to give me crap for eating the wood lilies, I'm going to say, well, do you want to quit farming? They'll all come back. Anyway, sorry, but that's that. Hello again. You know, it's interesting that so often people bustle through. This is Rotary Park. Thousands of people a day walk through here on their way to work, and they just don't have any consciousness of all the trees they're passing. And here, which is not native, is a pear tree. They're not large. They're not like something you'd buy in the store. They're fairly small, but they typically get a whole lot bigger than that. And they're a little bit woody when they're ripe. I usually wait for the first frost in the fall, and the sugars flip a little bit. But they're a little bit woody, but somewhat sweet, and definitely pear flavored. I've made a chutney with them, along with pecans and tamarinds and things like that. That was very, very good. And of interest, there's two in the park. One here, one on the other side of the tennis court. There's also two coveys of partridge that live in this park, one on the north side and one on the south side. So if there's any place in the world where you might ever see a partridge in a pear tree, it could be right here in Rotary Park. I don't think partridge light and sit on branches like some birds might, but if there was ever that chance, it's right here. That's about it. I just know the normal one is Prunus pennsylvanica.
Yeah.
I don't know what this is.
Yeah, I don't know the Latin name.
It'll still be a prunus.
Yeah, but it's the common name is Schubert chokecherry, and identified by these purple leaves, little clusters of cherries, chokecherries, look like little bunches of grapes hanging down. Yeah, and can be picked and enjoyed just like the wild chokecherry. But it's very common. Find them in parks, find them in people's yards. Very easy to identify because of the purple leaves, the clusters of berries, and yeah, used and enjoyed the exact same way.
Racemes.
Okay,
Racemes. I'm going to be botanical on you.
Sure. Yeah.
So they have. Be careful that you don't bite on them hard, because you're going to break a tooth. They've got big pits in them, just like a cherry.
Yeah.
A real cherry. And they're a little bit bitter, but they make excellent jellies and wines and things. And anything that's bitter is astringent, which means that if there was nothing better around and this was the only thing you recognized, and you just got a whole bunch of bites or insect bites or something like that, you could just crush up a whole bunch of these in your hands and rub the jelly and make yourself into a sandwich kind of thing. And that would help take some of the itch out. There's much better things around for astringents, but that's one of them.
Yeah.
And well, I may as well just run with it since we're here. The bark of this tree has something called hydrocyanic acid in it, and if you look it up, you'll note that the leaves themselves are poisonous because of that acid. But the acid is not it is a narcotic. And it's one of the many things that were used that were smoked, not literally in a pipe, but smudged sort of thing, for things like whooping cough. So we've got the new round-eyed white faces coming in, and one of their daughters, an 11-year-old girl, has whooping cough, and the local people have shown her how we're just going to put her down beside a fire, take some coals, and take a bunch of dried chokecherry bark, and this looks cruel and weird and evil, but by golly, it worked, right? So the little girl is no longer coughing.
Yeah.
And so they started, well, maybe we could make a syrup from it. And they tried cooking it up, and it was very bitter. So they sweetened it and made sort of like a cough syrup out of it. And when you look at a box of like wild cherry cough drops, and there's a little cherry on the box, it's not some other thing from BC, these are the cherries that are on the box, because they still use chokecherry bark to make the cough drops.
Right. Amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Now, in terms of the bark, that is, how would one harvest that or prepare that?
Any barks are best stripped early in the spring or late in the fall, spring being preferable.
Yeah.
And you could take, I would usually look for things that you'd prune anyway if you had the chance. You know, you're not going to kill a tree like this if you cut one branch off or something.
Yeah.
And in the spring when the sap's flowing, barks peel pretty easy. Like, I'd look for bigger branches than this. I'd want to go for something a little stouter.
Yeah.
But you just take a few strips off, and it'll peel off pretty quick. And the inner bark is actually the best. You could leave it alone, or best would be to peel it.
Right.
And get just the inner bark, and go from there. So, or you might even see a branch that's recently broken in the wind, and then that makes you feel more ethical.
Right.
Because you didn't harm the tree at all, and always we'd say thank you.
Yeah.
You might even ask first and say, hey tree, I'd like to do a little harvesting from 2 of your branches, would you mind? And branches from the chokecherry tree, it's one of the hardest woods, probably is the hardest wood that grows in Alberta. So it was always the main choice for making things like the teepee pegs and things like digging sticks.
Yeah.
You'd make like a little chisel on one end, used for carrying the hot coals from the fire into the sweat lodge. Just mini tasks like that where you needed some stout tools to work with.
Yeah.
So it was used a lot as a tool, as well as for the coughing.
Amazing.
But there's your cough drops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's a wrap for today.
We have done we've done this much of what we could do in this park. Like, there's just such an abundance around us here. It's silly.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we caught a few of the berries in phase. There's others that are still here. We might come back soon.
Oh, totally. I think that's what we'll do. We'll come back in a week or two, and we'll keep going. I mean, as long as it takes to kind of really cover off the diversity. If you're enjoying this and you want to see more, we would love to come back to this park again and do something similar. I mean, as you mentioned, just that much we scratched the surface of what is planted here. So this will give us focus for the next couple of weeks to keep walking through the park and talking about plants.
Yeah, and I'll be back with hopefully some trout on my breath.
All right. Okay.
Going fishing.
Right on. Bye for now.